Okay, you were right.
First, McNamara. Casey is a competitive offshore sailor based in Newport, Rhode Island, and the founder of McNamara Marine Systems.
Yeah, that is not me. I work in... I'm sorry, everyone. We used an AI for this, and there's an issue here. How about you try again?
Correction noted. Casey McNamara, Capgemini invent. Casey is a behavioral economist and executive leadership coach who joined Capgemini's talent transformation practice in 2021.
This is really embarrassing, everyone. So let's try this the old-fashioned way. So I'm Casey McNamara. I lead data and AI at Capgemini invent. Our purpose in life is to make AI real for our clients. Maybe we'll have a little more luck trying our next speaker.
And our next speaker is Daniel Sumners. Daniel is a Nashville-based singer-songwriter whose debut album Voltage received a Grammy nomination in 2024.
You know, first of all, that would be really awesome. That's definitely not me, but your mustache, man,
I know,
is impeccable. So that's what's awesome. But no, I'm Daniel Sumners. I'm the director of data and AI platforms at CenterPoint Energy. And essentially, my role is enabling the organization for data and AI with both, anywhere from data engineering to architecture and technology.
All right, let's see if the third time is a charm.
Akram Al-Ganad is today's final speaker. Akram is a robotic professor at Central Paris Engineering School.
Okay, nice. Actually, you did get the engineering school right. I did study there. However, I work at Capgemini invent. And I like the hair, by the way. I'll try to grow it a bit more. But so I work with Casey at Capgemini invent. I lead AI enablement and transformation. And I had the pleasure to work with Casey and Daniel on this program that we're going to share more information. But Casey, clearly there's an issue with the AI in terms of understanding the context and who we are. So maybe that's part of what we're going to discuss today.
Yeah. So I'm going to say something that I'm sure will sound familiar to many of you. The last few years, we've seen a lot of failure in AI, and there's been a lot of investment, and even now, most companies really don't feel ready for AI. I'd even say that right now, like most clients I'm talking with, they feel more skeptical with AI, even though there's more urgency right now and more need to feel like they have to have this figured out. And so we've heard a lot of themes on how we solve this. One of them is AI-ready data, but what is that? I mean, getting your data ready with AI, that's never going to end. It's a little too convenient to blame problems with AI on lack of AI-ready data. And then there's this theme of how do we scale AI? I looked through the sessions at Google Next here, and it seemed like maybe half of them had the word scale in them. And so the question is, how do we kind of move that beyond a buzzword and actually scale AI in a way that's intentionally designed for our business users? And so today what we're going to talk about is how do we actually solve that? And so Daniel, Akram, and I, we've been working at CenterPoint on a program called Helix. And so this is a really interesting problem which gets deeper into these questions. Before we jump in, Daniel, do you want to tell us a little bit more about CenterPoint Energy and the unique data and context challenges that you have?
Yeah, so at CenterPoint, we're an electric and natural gas utility. We serve approximately 7 million customers across 4 states. We operate multiple lines of businesses across multiple jurisdictions, and each of those jurisdictions have their own regulatory requirements. This really creates, inherent complexity on how our data is produced, governed, and consumed. When the decisions you make impact the lives of your customers and your communities, being probably right, it really isn't acceptable. Akram, you've been working with CenterPoint over the last year or so. What have you observed?
I mean, that's interesting. I've seen it directly working with you and your team. And if we step back, it's not necessarily a unique challenge for CenterPoint Energy. It's a pattern that we see across organizations. People need to make decisions to do their job, but they don't have access to consistent and governed way to do that. What they end up doing is they go back to extracting data, building dashboards, building spreadsheets, and somehow they're building their own version of truth to do their actions and to do their job. And maybe, Casey, as we talk about version of truth, Is this a data governance topic?
So, I think this is less of a data governance topic. At core, this is more of a context problem. And if you want to dig into this context problem in the enterprise, a good place to start is to look at how people are making decisions with data today. And when you dig into that, what you usually find is maybe 20,000 different dashboards, and they all have their own unique business logic built in. And so now we're looking to bring AI into that same environment, and we're running into all kinds of issues, and we're getting stuck. It's because all that business logic right now that's living in spreadsheets and in dashboards, it's siloed, and then that's just the stuff that we can kind of see. There's so much more that's living in procedures and in people's heads, and that's stuff we need to do in order to really run the business. Yeah. And so this isn't really a technology challenge either. It's about how do we systematically extract all of this know-how in a way that we can build AI such that people can better do their job. Akram, what are your thoughts on this? Have you seen this show up anywhere?
I mean, it does resonate for me, because if we take an example, it's not necessarily a CenterPoint example, but it's a general example that potentially might seem familiar for you. When you take the word customer, in organizations, you might end up with like 14 different definitions across 6 departments, from finance, sales, support functions, even between like regional teams and corporate global teams. In reality, those definitions are not necessarily wrong. They're right in their own context because they interact with the customer at different steps in the journey for different reasons. So forcing people to comply with one definition sometimes make more difficulties for them than helping them. So as you said, Casey, it is a meaning problem. And Daniel, one of the things I really appreciate working with you, you want to advance with AI, but in a grounded way. How do you see those patterns and challenges showed up, and what mattered the most for CenterPoint?
Yeah, actually, before I answer that point, I do want to go back to Casey's point on just this general self-service hype that's been happening over the past how many years or so. I'm not against self-service, but what I am against is KPIs and business logic being embedded within dashboards. And I do think we're starting to see that, shift towards more of a centralized governance approach. But, back to your question, Akram, we kept coming back to like one core question: what does someone need to be able to make an operational decision with confidence? It wasn't, speed. It wasn't automation. What it was is trust. And we built trust into 4 different dimensions. First, governed and audible data. Second was security and regulatory compliance. Third is reliable and explainable answers. And then fourth and finally was respect for human expertise and judgment. If any one of those breaks, trust is going to break, and people are going to revert back to Excel where they can validate it themselves.
I mean, that's really important, especially that we stopped building AI toys or like shiny objects. And we said, let's go back to the basics. How to design systems that are built for usability, accessibility, and you said, Daniel, like trust. And we saw there is a big opportunity because there are decades of institutional knowledge that are in people's mind. And the question is, how can we capture it, not necessarily in a wiki that no one is going to use or in a training material that's already outdated once it's published, but how we can capture that knowledge and embed it directly into the system to enable people to make decisions with AI. And we want to capture it, but also in a way that is alive, that is governed, as well as accumulating over time to make sure that this knowledge is like shared across the enterprise.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. The hardest part is definitely the missing context. It's that expertise on what the data means and how to interpret it that lives in the heads of everyone. A good example of this is, we had a senior analyst retire, and within weeks, the team was blocked. Not really because the data was gone, the data was still there. What was lost was the meaning, the judgment and the expertise, that operational logic. Specifically, just because the data was there didn't mean that individuals knew how to interpret it. Casey, I'm sure you see this elsewhere.
Yeah, we've seen it at pretty much every company we're working with right now. All of that knowledge that's living in people's heads and side conversations and spreadsheets that maybe only one person knows. That's the operating logic of your business. And right now, most of that is actually implicit. It's living in intuition. And so this idea of kind of codifying the enterprise, making all of that knowledge explicit, governed, and available to every user, agent, and application that needs it, that's kind of the core of what Helix is. And I think we've used the term Helix a lot here, and we've been talking about that. So I think it's time we maybe show a video on what Helix actually is.
Work doesn't start with tools, it starts with questions. Where is the data? What is the story behind it? Helix is built for these moments. It guides users through intuitive journeys that turn questions into clarity. Without friction, users can discover it, understand it, action it. Let's see how this journey comes to life. Today, Helix brings reports, data sets, and dashboards from across the enterprise into a single, trusted entry point, surfacing what matters the most in seconds. And when questions go deeper, the conversation begins. Users ask naturally and explore insights in real time. Helix returns structured outputs, ready to be copied, downloaded, or refined through follow-ups. Behind every answer is transparency. Data Trail shows how each response was constructed, building trust and confidence at every step. With a trusted foundation established, Helix is ready to scale. Turning insight into action comes next. Helix will help CenterPoint Energy move beyond surface data to act when it matters. It will enable users to generate workflows for real-time alerting, pairing proactive recommendations with governed business logic. When an alert is triggered, Helix will bring the signal into focus, not only showing what changed, but why it matters. Critical context will be added through the planning agent, bringing in unstructured data like operating procedures to help users understand what to do next. That context enables action, moving users from understanding to resolution without breaking their workflow. Built for the enterprise, Next Helix will integrate with third-party tools and self-service applications that use the same shared intelligence. Helix, CenterPoint Energy's front door to AI-driven insights, built for trust, built for action.
I mean, I'm happy where we are today, right? I remember, Daniel, like when we started this book program, we started with the idea of like, let's build a data marketplace, right? I mean, one of the challenges that many companies have is they already invested a lot of effort and time to put data in the cloud. And the question is, how can we make it accessible for the end users and how we can generate value? But what we realize, and I mean, what we see also in the market is that when people build those data marketplaces, they suffer either people not using the platform or they're not able to justify the value. And this is where we shifted a bit. We said, okay, let's stop asking the question of making data findable and let's think about how to help people make decisions. And we designed backward from there. And this is what we call, and you will hear us mention a lot, intent-driven design approach. We start with the business intent, like what are the decisions and the outcomes that we expect people to do, and then from there, we identify and map the right metadata, documents, anything needed to make those decisions available for the end users.
And that's the key difference. Data people like us, we think in data land, we think in tables and schemas, but people that are actually going to use this kind of tool, they're thinking in decisions like, why did my throughput drop last Tuesday? And it's more important that we construct an answer that they can trust, and we also embed all of the context they need to really make a decision. And Daniel, back to your story about institutional knowledge. How is Helix actually solving this at CenterPoint?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, we're taking a little bit of a different approach. I would say most tools, they optimize for answers. We wanted to optimize for accountability. You know, specifically the definitions, the logic, the why. Analysts, they used to export large amounts of data. They would manipulate it in Excel and rebuild that logic repeatedly. With Helix, users are able to ask questions in natural language, and the answers they arrive with the definitions, the logic, the lineage, already embedded. And this is key because we're now starting to see this shift of institutional knowledge from individuals into really code. And crucially, another big thing is people aren't having to change the way that they work. We're fitting it into their existing workflows.
Exactly, and maybe I can bring one example. Like I remember when Helix went live last year, one of the users, they're already used to the habit of when they have a specific request to do an analysis, they will come to your team, Daniel, and say, could you please help me to build this analysis, right? And at that moment, Helix was already in production. So we told that user, go back to Helix, talk to it in your natural language, and ask it, and let's see what's the result together. And what they saw was really impressive. Two things. One, the ability to get the answer in 15 seconds instead of waiting 1 week for your team to pull the data together, to build the analysis, etc. But the second thing is that they were able to see what's behind the calculation in terms of filtering, transformations, and all of that. The trust is built in the system. And since then, that user has been using the platform every single day.
And so I'll talk a little bit about accuracy and transparency next. So, when we think about this, we're not trying to build an AI that understands everything in that kind of AGI vision sense. What we're really trying to focus on here is building AI that understands what it needs to understand, and it gets that right almost 100% of the time. And that's what's most important for most enterprise scenarios. The way off-the-shelf AI would get there would be asking the users to do a ton of work. With Helix, the user can just ask in their own language, and all of the definitions and the context, that's going to get both assembled and evaluated all in the background. We are also prioritizing transparency, so every answer is showing its work. The business logics, the filters, if anything changed, that's all visible in the data trail. We thought about kind of spreadsheets here, and we see that spreadsheets typically, most people would agree, are the most trusted data tools still in most companies. And the reason is really simple. You can click on a cell and you can see the exact calculations behind there. We want to think about how do we bring that same level of transparency into Helix so that Helix can earn that same kind of trust. Daniel, I think you could maybe talk a little more and get into how we architected this from a semantic layer.
Yeah, I think actually the best thing to do is kick off the semantic layer video.
Okay.
Data is everywhere, across systems, across teams, across regions. But without context, the same question can produce different answers. Metrics change, definitions drift, and trust breaks down. Intentionally designed around how people work, Helix is anchored in business intents. At the core of Helix is a business context layer, a shared language between data, AI, and the business. It brings together definitions, measurements, regional context, and relationships into a single durable foundation. Raw data is elevated into business understanding, defined once and reused everywhere. Tables become entities, columns become business terms, calculations become governed metrics. But Helix goes further than structured data alone. In the future, it will connect geospatial data, business procedures, and operational knowledge. So Helix understands not just what happened, but why. That context is what powers Helix's AI. Agents rely on governed rules, skills, tools, and business context to interpret intent and retrieve the right insights at runtime. Trust is built in, with full transparency and observability of the data, as well as AI logs and decisions. Helix, the foundation for CenterPoint Energy intelligence at scale.
And so when we thought about diving into this and the overall landscape that we're navigating here, we oriented around 4 key design decisions. So the first was, who are we actually building for, and how do we keep this grounding in serving those users? We also thought about how do we consistently extract business context in a way that's always aligned to intended use? And then while doing that, how do we realign people and think about governing this whole thing differently? And then finally, we want to make sure that this gets easier over time. So we want to build this kind of engine that grows context while we can evaluate at scale. And so I think maybe let's start with the first one. What do you think, Akram?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we still see, Casey, a lot of AI strategy deck are very heavy oriented on building agentic automations, a lot of automations, and also it's cool, but also like thinking about like how to reinvent the business processes around those agentic automations. Also, there is another option. The other option is really how to think and putting the human at the center of it. I mean, we tend to be curious. We work also in a non-linear way, and also the human tends to be exploring, pushing back, questioning, and interacting with the system. So there are 2 choices, and we, with CenterPoint, but also with other clients, what we notice is that what's really working for them is designing for the human. So we said, let's do that. Build transparent system that gain the confidence of the users, but also give them the control to be able to challenge and refine the system. In a way, it helps them to unlock what they couldn't be doing today. And Daniel, maybe you've been at CenterPoint now for a while. How do you feel like AI is changing how the workforce is working?
Yeah, you know, I've been at CenterPoint for 17 years now. It's really cool to see how far we've gone and really the vision of where we're going. Just ultimately, it's really an exciting time to be in the industry. With that being said, you know, we are making a deliberate strategic bet on our employees, you know, to empower them with a transparent, you know, business context-rich solution.
I mean, I agree with you. Like empowering the employees become like the corner of our approach. How to back it in real and tie it back to decisions. We're not just building for curiosity, but also we're building for people to really use the tool in their day-to-day activities.
Right. In Casey, as we start to think about this, if we want to empower our employees more, you know, how would we start to design an intelligence in a way that, you know, really helps them?
So that brings us to our second decision. And our second design decision was about how do we embed business context at scale and make sure we're always mapping that to the business intent. So if someone asks a common BI, business intelligence type question, like show me last week's completed work orders broken down by region, completed might mean something very specific. Region might not be aligned to just a zip code. This problem has been known in the BI space for a long time. Semantic layer companies have popped up to kind of solve this translation problem more than 10 years ago, so it's been around.
And really, that technology is the easy component here. The hardest part is, you know, getting multiple business units in the same room and to agree upon what a metric actually means.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And with AI, we actually have to go beyond business intelligence, though. We have to think about, back to that idea of coding the enterprise, coding enterprise action. So if we think about adding now alerting functionality and notification functionality and action functionality, we're not just embedding the definitions anymore, we're looking to embed the actions, the goals, the guardrails. All of that also has to be built into this business intent. And that's kind of the heart of how we designed Helix. There's this kind of intent map which has all of that within it. And that helps us think about how do we extract and embed at scale most efficiently. Akram, you walk us through a little more on how we did this.
I mean, we took a practical path. We decomposed the intent into 3 layers. First of all, the metric that we want to govern, right? Then, what is the context needed to be identified and built to make a decision? And as you said, like the guardrails to act. We talk a lot about automation with agentic capabilities. Yes, I think that's important, but from our standpoint, you need to earn the right to automate. And so what we did in the case of Helix is first we layer in the context, and as we mature, we add more and more automation on top of it, but all on top of the same foundation and governed foundation. I mean, and for me, this seems like a big shift in the organization, thinking how to manage all of this data, Casey. Like, I mean, we talk about context, metadata, and all of those things together. Do you think like today, the traditional data governance is good enough?
So data governance, we could kind of think a little bit like a seed collection. Now, as we move towards this new world, we introduce the idea of context governance. And context governance is more like managing a forest. And what I mean by this is managing more of the meaning. So what depends on what, and in a forest, if you rip something out, how does that impact the rest of the ecosystem? In this kind of analogy, most companies have a ton of seeds, and probably most aren't very good at organizing them, but still, I think the main problem with AI now is coming down to the meaning and alignment problem. And in an agentic world, that kind of context governance problem isn't an option. We have to build it in. And once we do this, and what we've already seen, there's a massive shift in how we do this governance work. The initial thing we've seen is there's a shift from people who would classically be this kind of business process owner role to now what we're defining intent owners. Daniel, I know this is something we've been talking about a lot. Even in data governance, I know there's always been this talk about making people run that more and more business aligned. But now with AI and context governance, I think the urgency, it's not just about a nice to have, it's a must have. Have you seen this play out?
Yeah, first of all, that analogy, Casey, is definitely giving me some like Johnny Appleseed vibes or something, but I couldn't agree more. Ultimately, the people that are needed to build the context, it's not the data engineers, it's the business experts. Traditional governance, it focuses on like cleanliness and compliance, necessary, but it's really structurally insufficient for AI. AI requires governing the meaning, and the people that own that meaning are the business.
I mean, that's a real change management. So it's a big shift, but also it's a more intuitive, because now we're not asking the business people to learn new data governance framework. We're asking them to do what they're already doing today, like how to manage the decisions and the expectations behind them. It's really how to codify the enterprise. So the vision is asking the business less time managing metadata and data catalogs and more time spending on managing the business intent, which is part of their job. And Casey, with all of this, making it real and making sure that people are using it in a trusted way, I feel like reliability is a key component. Could you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah, so reliability. Part of our thinking here is managing reliability like a product. And when I say this, I don't mean a slogan, I mean a real product, because in how we think about this, we view this as a key to how we're going to be able to scale this quickly. One client, not CenterPoint, another client, we kind of walked through similar 3 types of decisions here, and they said, that makes a lot of sense, but this stuff is really, really hard, especially for a large, complex company. And how can you make it easier? And now we're adding this question of evaluation, and saying AI is going to require more evaluation at all steps of the process. That doesn't make it feel any easier. It feels like one more tax that we're adding to most people who this was never planned in their actual job. So that's kind of a challenge we're dealing with. But the shift here, it's to think about this evaluation as an opportunity. So what we're trying to do here is think about evaluation as productive friction that's being entered into the system. And if we move outside of thinking about evaluation as a purely kind of technical task, we can use this, right? Evaluation is creating these intentional pauses. And in those pauses where we can bring in the business experts, we can stop, think, and then use that to systematically codify the additional context we need to embed in to make the systems work in the most efficient and as needed way possible. Akram, does this make sense to you?
I mean, if I understand you well, like evaluation is becoming the contract between the people and the platform. When people can see the evaluation and say, yes, this is exactly what we mean, it becomes the one domain where technical experts, business stakeholders, and data engineers speak the same language. All of this compounds over time. And I agree with you, yes, the AI tax may exist in some form, right? But if the evaluation done in the right way, it will help to become like the scaling mechanism to go beyond the linear effort. I mean, Daniel, I know that like one of the things that I noticed for the evaluation for CenterPoint is radically different from how you used to test things previously. Could you just share a bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, for us, this is certainly a major cultural change. Evaluation, moving it from QA at the end to definition on day one. Business experts, defining what right means as the system is built. And ultimately, this evolution becomes a mechanism through which, the platform, it continuously improves.
And this is exactly when things clicked for the users of Helix. When they saw that reliability is managed and robustness is built into the system itself, it helped us to gain their confidence. And I mean, I remember when we did our user testing in Helix to make it in production, one of the biggest slogans that we put as a campaign was break it to make it. So yes, we did a competition, asked people to start using the tool, test it, break its limits. It helped us to give us the feedback, but also to make the system more and more robust, but it made people part of that journey. I think now just to recap on those 4 decisions. We start by the human. This is where the core thing is happening, and these are the people that are going to be impacted by AI, but will be empowered by AI. The second thing is how to think about it, not from a data perspective, but starting from a business intent. When you understand what business intent, what business needs to be doing, and then you identify and map the right data to enable that business intent. The third one is, with all of these things, we're shifting, as you mentioned, Casey, from the data governance to the context governance to make it more holistic in terms of AI systems. But the last one is reliability and evaluation, how to embed it in our journey in a very continuous way to gain that trust and have it. And for us, trust is not just a word or a promise. It's engineered in the system itself, in our ways of working as well.
Yeah, and that's really powerful to me. And trust is the foundation we've built more than anything. And so we've covered what we built. We talked about why we built it, and we talked about the decisions behind it. I think it's probably time to talk about where we're going from here. So Daniel, do you want to talk a little bit more about how this is evolving at CenterPoint?
Yeah, today we've got, for our core pilot user group, about a 70% active adoption rate. We like to call our most active users Helix heroes. So the goal being to publicly recognize and reward these individuals, because ultimately, as we start to think about how we're going to scale this amongst multiple business units, we're really going to need these individuals to be brand ambassadors and help us to promote the product. As we start to onboard these new users, another key decision is, or key thing that we need to make happen is, we don't want it to feel like AI is happening to them. We want individuals to feel like it's working with them.
Right. Yeah, and those numbers are really impressive. And I think one of the things we're going to have to do to continually move Helix, advance and sustain these numbers, is move that platform closer and closer to the way people work. And I know this is something you've been thinking about a lot.
Yeah, I mean, for us to keep that high adoption rate, or even to potentially grow it, we're going to need to start introducing new capabilities into the platform. And the first one I think is really, we start to think of this as like a skills library. It's not a collection of one-off agents. It's a library of specialized capabilities that really all inherit the same foundation. So an example could be anomaly detection, or alerting that a work order is overdue, to forecasting. But because everything's grounded in the same context and guardrails, we're not starting from scratch every time that we expand, and we're actually able to compose new intelligence from what's already governed.
Right.
I mean, the skill concept is really interesting, especially as you start fitting it into how people naturally are working, right? It's not changing their ways of working, but empowering them to do it in a faster way, but also in a trusted way. And I see, as we do this and composing it more and more, the economics change completely. Context and skills that are built on top, and being available, but they're all built once, and we use it for every new capability and new application. They all work from the same foundation. And Casey, it's interesting how, as we talk about skills, now we're adding a new whole dimension to the context as well. How do you manage that? It becomes more and more another AI text to it?
Yeah, it's interesting. And when we think about this now, with skills, we're adding this new dimension of more dynamic context, more temporal context. And I think that's making it only so much more important that we start to think about how do we move towards automated context. And so today, Helix is still something that's very manual in how we're building this out. Context is very manual in how we're building it out. We're sitting in workshops with experts, we're defining metrics, we're encoding rules, and then we have the evaluation engine like we talked about, but that's primarily about ensuring accuracy and trust. But next, as we move forward, we want to build that same engine so it's kind of pointing back to us. So we want the context engine to kind of flag where context might be thin, kind of flag any kind of definitions that might conflict, start to tell us additional things that we need to build into the system to make it smarter. The goal here is to make this easier as we go. So kind of make context building easier as we scale instead of harder.
Yeah, and for a company like ours, I mean, that's everything. We can't really afford this large, massive context army building out this massive context layer by hand. Right. Ultimately, the path has to be, build the foundation rigorously, prove it works through evaluation, and then let the system help you extend it.
Right.
Akram, does this resonate with you?
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what we see the industry is heading towards. The organizations that are going to win are not the one focusing on pontificating technical architecture or like just building a lot of data products, hoping that they will be used or useful for AI. Neither those who are just building like a bunch of thousands of AI agents. It's really those are focusing on building a context infrastructure that is with a governed meaning, in a way that is living and compounding. And this is like what Helix is really helping us to unlock.
And with that, I think there's maybe a third shift that we're seeing and something we're actively thinking about here. And this might actually be the biggest one. So, as we talk about codifying the enterprise, all of that operating logic that we're now governing and we're kind of bringing into a more centralized place, we started that journey, like you've seen, to make AI work. But once you have that, the implications go way beyond AI.
I mean, one of the implications is enterprise software. Today, we have a lot of applications that are hard-coded in the sense of like all the logics, all the processes, and every time there is an implementation of an ERP, CRM, planning tools, or any other tool, we spend a lot of time to re-encode the logics to make that system work, right, from scratch. But they end up like having different logics in silos. And if we say, okay, with one governed layer that is sitting outside of the application but is available to connect to new application, they all have the same definition and rules, it becomes very different. We stop reinventing and we start composing. And then I think, like, as we talk about it, stop reinventing and start composing, I feel this is a pretty big shift for CenterPoint. Like, you used to think about buy versus make every time. And I feel like with time now, with the speed of delivery, making more build makes sense, especially on top of a governed layer.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree. We've been traditionally a buy versus build shop, just mainly because of that speed to value. But with, some of the, agentic capabilities and code automation such as Claude, I can really start to see us shifting from, building building versus buying. And when you have this like codified foundation that can really you can describe what you need, and the system will help you, build it based off of the business context, the rules, and the constraints. We're actually able to start, shifting from, or not just building AI applications, rather, we're building applications with AI on this, substrate that already encodes how our system actually works. So for us, this means thinking broadly about like what questions do we want to have answered with our core data model, and then making sure that we design this codification layer correctly from the start, because really everything that we build is built on top of it.
I mean, that's a fundamentally different enterprise stack. We see companies are becoming, with time in the past few years, are becoming tired from every time deploying a new application is customizing that application. And I know like one client, and Casey, that same client, they basically dropped the whole idea of customizing an application, like for example, even now ERPs and CRMs, and they say, you know what, it's a lot of work to build it, but also it's a lot of work to maintain it and upgrade it. And therefore they decided, and we see this type of shift today, they decided to go with the out-of-the-box processes from these applications. And in somehow, I agree that some processes might need to be optimized or maybe standardized from the market, but in some of those customized processes that companies have within the company, they embed their own knowledge. They embed also their own specialties, and even to some extent, they have their own competitive advantages in those processes. And I know what you say, Daniel, is very important, is that now what excites me when we see all of this happening, like the power to go faster in terms of development, but also build it on top of a governed layer, it really changed the whole game.
And so I think we're almost out of time here. I just want to say one thing, that it's been really great to work with Daniel and the whole CenterPoint team, and we are super excited to see to help and see how all of these things evolve, because we truly believe this is some of the most important parts of making this stuff really work in enterprise. But I think we need to wrap up now.
Oh, that's too bad. That was a great conversation. I've been listening, and I think I've learned a few things.
Oh, you're back. Another one. What did you learn?
I am, and based on everything discussed today, I believe the key takeaway is AI scales when it's grounded in business context, shared meaning, governed logic, and trust built into every layer.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually pretty good, huh? I mean, and where can people find us to discuss more?
Visit the Capgemini Client Experience Center at Orla Restaurant in Mandalay Bay before tonight. Unlike my earlier introductions, I'm fairly confident this information is correct.
Wow. I guess if you give AI the right context, it will give you the right answer. Just don't ask a math question.
Yeah, and so with all of this, I mean, I think the one big kind of theme of this is, starting to shift away from asking the question, what should we build with AI, and moving more towards, what does AI need to know about us first? And so with that, come find us at the restaurant, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of Google Next.